Hello, my name is Autumn Brown, and I'm a researcher with Oklahoma State's Oklahoma Oral History Research Project. For our Activism in Education and the Civil Rights Movement Oral History Project, today, March 9th, 2020, I am meeting with Larry Sharp to discuss his experiences with school desegregation in Oklahoma City. Mr. Sharp, thank you so much for talking with me today. Let's just begin by telling me about yourself. Where were you born? Tell me a little bit about your family.
Okay, first of all, I am from Houston, Texas. I was not born in Oklahoma City. I was born in Houston. However, my experiences growing up was probably no different from any other black youth in this United States. In Houston, Texas, things were about just like they were anywhere else. Segregation at that time was the norm of the day. You didn't question segregation because that's all you knew. You were born into segregation, you grew up in segregation, so you didn't know any difference. I was an only child raised by an aunt and uncle. I did not really get into a different type situation until I was 18 years old and went into the service. At the time I went in, the service had been desegregated by, I'm thinking it was Dwight D. Eisenhower that desegregated. It had not been long. So when I went in, however, we were desegregated, and for a lot of the kids, both black and white, it was the very first time that they had been together as a unit. So desegregation was new to practically everybody. However, being in the military, you knew that whatever the norm was or whatever the orders were, as a military person, you had to follow those. So whether we liked it or not, we were desegregated and attempted to make do with how things were as a desegregation unit. There were problems. There were name calling, there were fights, there were disturbances, but being in the military, they were quickly dealt with, and they were dealt with in such a fashion that you learn real quick to abide by the rules. I traveled extensively, met people from all over the country, and I will have to say that even though I grew up under segregation, there were places in the United States that were not segregated. I had an uncle and an aunt that lived in Seattle, Washington, and I'm told that there were no segregation. However, later we learned that there was a lot of segregation there. I guess just in their case it wasn't, because as he drove me around the city, the first thing he said was that you would not be able to tell who lived where unless they happened to be out in their yard. So it could be a white family or a black family. It really didn't make any difference. That's really about all that I can give you as far as growing up and what have you. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking that the first pains, if you would, of desegregation came along when Rosa Parks refused to move out of her seat in front of a bus. And as I understand it from reading history, she was not trying to desegregate anything, she was just tired. But I think that that's when the efforts to desegregate the country really started. I think the Montgomery boycott started there. And I think that when the Jim Crow laws started to be challenged, it also challenged the economics in the communities in which they touched. When Black people stopped taking the bus, the transit authority realized how much money they were losing. When they started to not shop at stores, they realized how much money they were losing. And this trend simply kind of started there, but it spread real quick across the country. I was not in on any of the sit-ins, the Claralupas, and all of that. But as I understand it, the economic impact of the sit-ins and the marches is what really changed the laws and the customs in the country. So I think it had more to do with economics than it had to do with the hearts and passions of the people in power. I don't think, maybe in the Christian community, maybe in some of the communities that might be true, but it is in my opinion that it had mostly to do with economics.
Why do you think that's an important thing to understand?
Because they didn't go willingly. They didn't embrace the idea just right away. It wasn't until their economics start hurting, the money start coming in. And I think that that's what brought about the change. I don't think it was brought about by pressure. I don't think it was brought about by any one person saying, well, this is not right, let's do this differently. And I think if it had not been for the economic impact, it would not have happened. It might have happened at some time or another, but what I'm feeling is that it happened because of economics more than anything else. Now, in the military, however, I really can't say or relate to what precipitated the change. It wasn't economics. It wasn't like out in the civilian world where stores and grocery stores and that sort of thing felt the impact. I'm thinking that probably it was more having to do with equality in the military. And I think because it worked in the military, that spilled over into civilian life. The schools, there is no doubt that the schools were different. The white schools probably had better equipment, better material, better books, better everything than we did, but we didn't know that. Our parents, when this all came about, was very, 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 very into being behind the children, being behind whatever they did. I have a cousin that was going to college at the time. And my uncle said that even though he did not know what was going on, but he was behind my cousin 100%. And that they kept a certain amount of money aside to go downtown and bail her out of jail should she get arrested, because they were being arrested. But he realized that this was a different time and that things were changing and that it would be the young people in this country that would bring those changes about. So the older generation of Black people sort of empathized with the young and supported them in whatever they did, because their time had passed and the future generation would be the one to bring about change in this country. And I think that that's probably how the change came about, is with the youngsters, with people who were in tune with that, like Clara Luther, Martin Luther King, and those people, Ralph Abernathy, Jesse Jackson. Those are the people who brought this change about. But it was because of these steps that the young people took and refused to go along with the Jim Crow laws and the separate but equal. And then I think one of the presidents, and I believe it might have been Lyndon Johnson, that brought about a lot of changes from the White House, from the government standpoint. So, looking back, that's my take on the beginning and the middle and more or less the ending of segregation in the South. I would also like to say that probably on this 9th day of March, 2020, that there are still problems in this country. There are still segregationists. There's still a lot of hatred as evidenced by things that's going on. But I think also that there are enough good people that the good people will probably win out. We will certainly have to endure some things. We will have to endure some pains because of our being Black. We will face subtle discrimination. We will face people who do not like us simply because of the color of our skin. Our children will suffer in school still, but it's isolated and it's not as blatant as it was in 1950 or 1940 or 1930 or even 1960. So we have made some progress. And it's not just a black and white thing, because it's a worldwide thing. When you think about the Muslims, you think about the Iranians, and you think about what's happening in the Middle East, and you think about all of the fighting that's going on because of ethnic origins. So it's not just a color thing, but I think segregation and discrimination is a inherent problem that just has to do with difference in human beings. Mm-hmm. I'm different, you're different, you believe this and I believe that, and because of that, we can't get along.
Right.
In most cases, not all, but in most cases, people have agreed to disagree and still live in unity. That's not the case everywhere, as evidenced by the news every morning of fighting that's going on in other parts of the world. Fortunately, here in the United States, we're not dealing with that kind of racism, but we're still dealing with racism, but at least we're not to the point of some of our overseas neighbors are dealing with, simply because of religions and because of beliefs, religion-wise. Mm-hmm. So I think that's mostly the difference. But here in this country, it's all about black and white, and now brown has entered into it, because brown people are facing some of the same problems right now that black people are facing.
Yeah.
Those of us that are of age have adjusted to the situation, and because of our past and because of our background, I think we have equipped ourselves to deal with a situation whenever it occurs. There are times when we probably would not like to be faced with problems, with racial problems. But I think as long as we live, we're going to be faced with them at some point in time, because that's just where the world is. We're all different. We all have our differences of opinion. We don't always all get along, even within our own community. But as far as segregation goes, and as far as discrimination goes, there is a difference of night and day between today and the 1940s, 30s, 50s, 60s.
Yeah.
As the song goes, we have come a long ways, but we still have a long ways to go. Things are better, but they are not the best. Sure, if you've got the money, you can build a house anywhere. You can go into any restaurant. You can order the same food that the people at the next table order. You can go in the same doors and you can drink out of the same water fountains. You can use the same restrooms. There are still people, however, that's disdainful to, both black and white. I'm not going to say that we are any different in some cases than everybody else. There are black people that can't stand white people, and there are white people that can't stand black people, and I think that's human nature. I will say that the difference today is much better than it was in the past.
So you mentioned growing up, you were segregated, and you didn't even, it was just the norm. Why do you think the older generation kind of shielded the younger generation from understanding that they were actually separate and unequal? Or do you think that was just kind of innate or inherent in that time?
I think at that time, because it was the norm, that most parents simply try to keep their children safe. And you grew up knowing already what the problems, and I can't even say the problem, but you grew up knowing what to do and what not to do. So you did it. It just wasn't a question. It didn't become a question until the bus incident. Prior to then, you just knew. When you went into a establishment, you knew the rules. You didn't question them. You just knew what to do. You knew which fountain to drink out of. You knew which door to use. When you got on a bus or public transportation, you knew to go to the back. So there was no problems because you went ahead and bowed to whatever the norm was in the establishment at that given time. There wasn't anything else to think about.
Mm-hmm. So how old were you when you kind of became aware of civil rights activism and things of that nature taking place?
I went into the military at the age of 17. My parents signed for me to go in because you couldn't go in until 18, but you go in 17 with authorization from your parents. So it wasn't until 1954, when I went into the military, that I was faced with the difference, faced with desegregation, faced with equality. So prior to that, I didn't know any different.
So you went into the military the same year that Plessy was essentially overturned?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, 1954 was when I went into the military. Prior to that, though, the military had been desegregated about a year, maybe 2 years before I went in. So the military probably was where the first desegregation occurred. I'm not sure of that. But all I know is that I went from segregation to desegregation overnight.
And what was that experience like for you?
It was just something that you had to get used to. I can't really put anything on what the experience was like, because you were in the military and you adapted quickly. Right now, there was no time to evaluate it. There wasn't time to think about it. You couldn't decide whether you wanted to or didn't want to. You were in the military, and whatever the rules were, you followed them. Because if you didn't, there were consequences to pay that nobody wanted to pay. So whatever you were told to do, or whatever it was that you were supposed to do, you did it. There was no questions.
Yeah.
So to say how it affected me, I can't, because I was military.
Mm-hmm.
One day I was a civilian living in a segregated society. The very next morning when I woke up, I was in a desegregated society in the military.
Wow.
Now, while I was desegregated in the military, however, my families and everybody back home was still going through the same thing. I don't remember when the Montgomery boycott or when Rosa Parks, I don't remember when that happened. But until that happened, and while that was happening, we were watching it on TV in the military. And it was hurtful to see things that were going on, to see people being abused with water hoses and being beaten and thrown in jail and all that. That all hurt. But that had to take place in order to get people to where they are today. So the early people who went through those things, we should never forget them. We should always hold them in very high regards because of the sacrifices that they made, the lynchings, the rapes, the murders, the burnings, all of those things. And there were some gruesome things that happened, things that most of the older people who have gone on know more about it than I do. But those were the things that had to be suffered for us to be where we are now, to have the jobs we have, to have the income that we have, to drive the automobiles that we drive, to live in the houses that we live in. Those are the people who made that possible by the sacrifices that they did. So even though it is a heinous past, even though it's a past that nobody is proud of, it's still the past. And we, because of the past, can always appreciate the present. But we still have to be very careful because things, even though they're different, in a lot of ways, they're still the same.
That's beautiful. That whole quote, I can just imagine being at the very finishing up. Because I love how this entire project is about remembering the past and celebrating the people who made such sacrifices for people like me.
Exactly.
And I just feel like when we live in this era, we forget about our ancestors.
Most definitely.
And I feel so strongly that we can learn from their works because, like you said, even though it's different, it's a lot of the same. So if we can remember them and celebrate and learn from them, maybe we can figure out how we can continue that change and making those difference. So maybe one day I can sit across the table to another young researcher and say, it is different, it has changed, and I'm happy, but we have to keep the baton going.
One of the most noticeable changes that I see is in our churches. We have right now many churches across the country that have very mixed congregations. At one time, I was a member of a white church. The overwhelming majority of the members of that church embraced me as just another brother, another man, another Christian. There were probably 1 or 2 or 3 people in there that kept their distance and did not approve of it, but went along with it. I am probably, because of my age and because of my experience, very comfortable in any situation. I can fit into any crowd. I can speak the language of any conversation that's going on, simply because of my age, my background, and my experiences. I feel that because of that, I am probably better able to adjust than a lot of people who does not have that. I've been fortunate enough to travel the whole world. I've been in many foreign countries, up and down the United States. So I've got just a little bit of an edge on the person that has not done those things. I had to work very hard to get along with people who had not been military. I know that's difficult and hard to understand, but as an ex-military person, I have so much information retained from the things that I've done, the places that I've been, the groups that I've been a part of, the things that I've seen, the experiences that I have, that the other person doesn't have. It's hard to tell a person how it feels to be in the middle of the ocean in the water if they've never been in the middle of the ocean in the water. If you've never been burned by fire, it's hard to imagine how it feels to be burned by fire. If you've never had a heartache, it's hard to get the other person to understand what it feels like to have a heartache. If you've never lost a loved one through death, it's hard to explain to a person that hasn't. So, inner experiences has a lot to do with where you are right now in life. My experiences differs from the person who has not experienced what I have. But we have to learn to accept each other as we are, rather than me looking down on him or him looking down on me. And sometimes that's difficult, even with our own community. It's difficult for the elite in our community to identify with those who are not and who hasn't. I have relatives who have never experienced any type of segregation or discrimination. So whenever they are confronted with it, they don't handle it very well. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
So I thank God really for where I've been, where I've gone, where I've come from, and where I am, in that I can sit here and relate intelligently to you about my history and where I've been and where I've come from.
So what brought you to Oklahoma? How'd you land here?
Okay, I was discharged at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, in Lawton in 1964, maybe somewhere in there. Came to Oklahoma City on my way to Houston. Stayed with a friend for a week, turned into 2, met a lady, rest my case.
It's a good reason to stay. So when you ended up settling in Oklahoma, what was the economic climate like? I mean, 64, where schools aren't even desegregated yet.
To give you an idea of what the climate was like, there was a variety store called Spartan's that was located over on Lincoln Boulevard. I think the voting people are in that building now. Sits back a ways. It's between 50th and 36th. It's over on the west side of the street. That business, Spartan, which was like our present day Walmart on a smaller scale, was the first job that I had in Oklahoma City. I was the second black person to work there as a store clerk. Previously, in that kind of business, the only jobs that we could have was that of a janitor, dishwasher. Many times in 1964, 65, 64, many times older black people would come by and smile and say, "I'm so glad to see you here." Well, that was then. That's nothing now. We're everywhere. I went from there to going back to school, obtaining some accounting experiences and what have you. And I went to work for a very large oil company here in Oklahoma City called Kerr-McGee.
Mm-hmm.
When I went to Kerr-McGee, I was maybe the 4th black person to be hired in that company. When I went in to an accounting position in an office, I went in making more money than I ever thought possible. Also, when I started, like I said, I was about the 4th person. Every day you would see different black faces. From what I'm told, the EEOC from Washington, D.C. came down and told Kerr-McGee Corporation that they needed to hire some black people, some Indian people, some Chinese people, some Mexican people. Otherwise, they had to integrate. They more or less told them. And so they did that. They went about hiring specifically minorities. And within a year's time, there were minorities all over the place. But it started there, and this was in 1960, about 64, 5. This maybe 19, let's see. My son was born in 66, So maybe it was 1970 maybe when I went to work for Kerr-McGee.
Did you know anyone by the name of Winard Brown?
Who?
Winard Brown?
Perhaps.
Or Mr. Bell. I can't think of his last name.
DeSoto Bell.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, we taught together at Douglas. He's awesome.
DeSoto came to work at Kerr-McGee in the computer industry. He was a teacher. And so, yes, he was in that first group.
Okay.
Fred, I can't think of his last name now. He was an attorney. But yes, those were some of the early Artheta Jones. Maxine Washington is her name now. Noveline Bryant. I could just go on and on and name, because these were the first. We were the first hired there. And so because we were the first and because we were the only ones, we kind of formed a little clique, a little group, because we were fortunate enough to be working for this big oil company, making the kind of money that. But even then, I later found out that as much money as I was making, I wasn't making the money that the person sitting next to me was making.
Yeah.
I started out at the very bottom, and I kept getting raises, and I didn't understand why. About every month, every other month, the boss was calling me in and saying, "We're going to give you a raise, give you a raise, give you a raise." But what I later found out is that when I started, I was on trial to find out how I was going to do. So after I proved myself, then I started getting the same benefits that the next person.
Yeah.
But the white person that came in hired the same time I came in as a hire, came in at a different salary than I did. Now I didn't know that, but I was in payroll, and being in payroll, I was a payroll accountant. Being in payroll, it enabled me to see all of this at a later date. But it didn't matter because I was there.
Yeah.
And so because of that, it didn't bother me.
Yeah. Is there anything else about Oklahoma, especially during this time of segregation or desegregation efforts, that stands out to you? Because my thing with Oklahoma, it's like there was a lot of social activism taking place in the state. So is there anything about that time that stands out to you that was occurring?
The biggest thing that I can think of now that you mention it is the garbage strike. I was an employee at Kerr-McGee when the garbage strike took place. We were asked by the leadership to stay home that day from our jobs to support the garbage workers. One of our workers at Kerr-McGee did so and was fired, terminated. We stood in our offices and looked down the street at the workers as they marched past, those of us that continued to go to work. My situation was I could not afford to not go to work. Even though my heart was with the workers, I could not take off. And that was the same situation that the other people there was in. We supported them. We went to the churches. We went to the activities in the evenings that led up to that and was subsequent to that. But that was the climate. If you did not come to work, that would be a termination. And so I do know of one person that did not come to work and was terminated. The rest of us, we came to work because we more or less had to, economic-wise. But it did a lot of good in the workplace. As things took place, like the garbage strike, it made things better for the rest of the industry as far as working and working conditions go.
What was the internal struggle like for you to your heart to be with the movement, but knowing like I'm in this position where I can't even, participate in a movement if I wanted to?
That's hard to say. I think in my particular department, I had a wonderful boss. His name was Mr. Price, Alton Price. He called me in his office. I had a ton of work to do out there, but he called me in his office and he was curious about this whole thing because all of his life had been dedicated to working and getting ahead, and he really had not given any thought to the problem. And so he questioned me at length. We spent a couple of hours in there talking about the problems that we faced as blacks, colored, Negroes, whatever the term was used at that time. So there were people, white people, Caucasian, that was very sympathetic to our cause and implemented policies and what have you to make things better, to make things more equal. I find that on the other side of the fence, that there were those people who, just like on our side of the fence, that just went along with everything because that's the way it was. They didn't want to make waves, they didn't want to change anything, they just, that's the way it was. And as things changed, they changed with it readily, saying, okay, this is the way things should have been to start with. So I'm okay with it. Most of the people that were in power, in upper echelon positions, were, I think, fairly okay with things changing and had a feeling that they should have been that way all along. Now there were one or two that didn't, but I'm thinking as I look back, you're causing me to deep down into recesses of my mind to bring these things back. But as I look back on it, I think there were a lot of those people who were happy to see change. You see what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. There were those few that abhorred change, that didn't want to change, wanted things to stay the same. We still had the same problems with police and the way they treated people and so forth. But then there were also good people.
Yeah.
And it was because of the good people that things progressed the way they did.
I have to agree, because you talked about that earlier in your interview about good people outweighing the bad. Mm-hmm. And even in today's economic and political climate, mm-hmm. we focus so heavily on what's happening and the bad things that are occurring, things like that. But it's interesting to look at the good things that are happening. And even when the recent elections happened and all of these things with immigration were taking place, it's interesting to see how the ACLU, which is the American Civil Liberties Union, how their donations just doubled, and that's just a sign of how many good people believe in what's right, and just a sign that good is taking place. And maybe we should focus on the good rather than always harping on the bad, because there is good.
We have to move. Sometimes it's uncomfortable, but in order to progress, we have to move. But we also have to give a lot of credence and give a lot of thanks to those people in the early days that started all of this. The OOHRP Browns, the Stokely Carmichaels, the, what's the lady's name?
Angela Davis.
Angela Davis. We have to. Even Malcolm X, you know, we have to give them credit, because if it had not been for them, if it had not been for their radicalisms and their willingness to go to jail, their willingness to take all of the things that they took, we would not have what we have now.
Yeah.
So it took all of that.
Yeah.
And we should never forget them. We should never, ever, ever, ever forget them. And some of us have. Some of us, unfortunately, don't even know about those people. I've got probably kids and grandkids probably that's never heard of Stokely Carmichael. Yeah, you see?
Yeah.
So I think we're falling down as a people, that we are not keeping those names in the forefront. Our Black history should be taught in such a way that people know about the Stokely Carmichaels and the OOHRP Browns, regardless as to whether or not you agreed or disagreed with their ideology, but at least they did something. At least they sparked some kind of emotion in the hearts and minds of our country to bring us to where we are. Had it not been for that, we wouldn't be here.
And that's kind of what this is doing, like, as far as, I mean, you spoke on like a national scale, definitely giving credence and celebration, but just even on a local scale with Oklahoma, like Claire Luper, Ada Fisher, and Nancy Davis. And these are giants. Yes. Yeah. And they're giants. And just when we think of Oklahoma history, we have to include these women in what they did for democracy in the state.
Very, very, very true. Yes, I did not mean to overlook them.
No. I didn't think that you did, but it's important. Like, I mean, because we do, even taking away from these women in Oklahoma, like, we have gotten so far away from teaching our youth about, like, Rosa Parks. And, I mean, we teach about Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King, but there are so many other radical,
people,
like,
local people.
Yes. And I mean, even just teaching about, like, the Black Panther movement and Fred Hampton and Angela Davis and Assata Shakur and all of these who are still alive. Like, I mean, Angela Davis is still alive. Like, she was at OU just a few weeks ago. You know? So I definitely think, like, history is very important and we have to celebrate.
We are probably one of the worst races of people when it comes to teaching our kids about our history. Orientals do a fantastic job of teaching their kids about their ancestors, and they grow up knowing about who did what and when and all that. And we don't.
Which is why oral history is so important, because I'm just wondering, like, how many people don't know. I mean, because my dad, he grew up, like, he had Claire Luper as a teacher, so he was always talking to me about Claire Luper and Nancy Davis and Ada Fisher and just segregation. And so I got a lot of that history from him. But I just wonder how many folks who don't transmit that oral history down.
There's a lot. You just, there's a ton.
Yeah. And then we just don't know. Like, was there anything else you want to add?
Well, I don't know that I can. I've tried to give you as much information as I could on my thoughts and where I am. And I am, to say, very happy being where I am, and am always appreciative of those people who came on before me that made all of this possible. And it's a shame that our youth do not know about it. And most of our youth who are right now heavily involved in an integrated society don't know.
Yeah.
And except for the month of February, when we do the Black History thing, that's the only time some of these names and events come up. So I would say, and then I'm just as guilty as anybody else, because the times that I have to tell my grandkids and what have you about things, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I focus on other things. I focus on today, and I focus on getting them from where they are to the next level in wherever they are. So I am at fault as much as anybody for not teaching our kids about our history. And I'm leaving it up to you, the teachers and the principals and the educators. And I notice even at my church, we have several ladies who are so dedicated to working with the youth. I'm not a youth worker. I was thinking about that today. I am not a youth worker. There have been times when we as men have been asked to come to the high schools to just be present, not do anything, just be in the hallway, sit in the classroom. I did it one time. But as a male, many of our educators have wanted us just come there so that they can see you. And I couldn't do it. My temperament would not allow me, because kids today, young people today, are very different. And I knew that faced with certain situations, I would not handle it very good. Knowing this, knowing this about myself probably was best that I do what I did, and I still.
Yeah, I mean, I understand that.
But
we all know our strengths.
Thank God for those that could do it. I can't do it, and I know I can't, so I used to try.
Well, I really appreciate you taking time out of your day to talk to me. Definitely a lot of great stories that.
Well, I hope that I have shared some insight.
Yes, you gave a lot of, especially with your military experience, you gave a lot of insight about like a whole new perspective that I had never even considered. So I really appreciate that perspective.
Well, I think the military kind of set the standard for the rest of the world.
Yeah.
The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Coast Guard, the this, the that, or whatever part of it was. I think that they paved the way. And I think it started with General Dwight D. Eisenhower, and then came on from there. And I think Lyndon B. Johnson, as president, had a lot to do with it, because he initiated the Great Society thing. Now, I'm not saying everything was perfect. There was no perfection, but at least they tried to do something to make life better for all people.
Yeah.
And we're not going to ever have a 100% society where everybody is just going to involve and love on everybody. We're going to always have difference. We still got problems. We got problems in our community. Our young ladies are getting pregnant. Our kids are killing one another. We've got somehow to put a stop to that. Don't know how.
Yeah.
Even within my family, I have problems with our youngsters.
Yeah.
And I think every family has probably the same thing. So I don't know what the answer is. I just hope and pray that something is done and something happens, that we don't fall back to where we were. And if we don't change, if we don't get a grip on and get a handle on things, I'm so afraid that that's where we're gonna.
I definitely think that's why it's so important to talk about our past and talk about our history, because I mean, it's so easy to regress, and if we don't know what we faced in the past, it's easy to just fall back
Repeat
into
it.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, thank you so much.